My grandfather built his own house when he was 23 years old. He dug the well himself, grew most of his own food, slaughtered his own animals, made his own medicine from plants in the field, and never once asked anybody for permission to do any of it. When he died at 91, he had never paid a water bill in his life. That was in 1987. Today, in parts of this country, doing exactly what he did would land you in court. Not because anything changed about the land, the plants, or the water. What changed was the paperwork. What changed was who decided they had the right to tell you what you could do on your own property with your own two hands. I put together this list of 20 skills that were completely normal for ordinary Americans just a few generations ago. Skills that kept families alive, independent, and free. And I want you to sit with the fact that several of these are now restricted, regulated, or outright illegal in certain states. We are going to talk about rainwater, raw milk, seed saving, unlicensed construction, and a lot more. If you make it to number 1, I promise it is going to change the way you look at your own backyard. And if you have not subscribed yet, hit that button right now because we cover this kind of content every single week and YouTube is not always going to show it to you in your feed. Number 20 was the first thing that surprised me when I started researching this list, and it is something almost nobody thinks about. Harvesting rainwater sounds like the most innocent thing a human being can possibly do. Rain falls on your roof. You put a barrel at the end of your downspout. You use that water to irrigate your garden. Farmers have been doing this since before recorded history. The ancient Romans built elaborate cistern systems. The people who homesteaded the American West literally could not have survived without catching and storing every drop they could find. But today, if you live in Colorado, you can only collect up to 110 gallons per household. In Utah, you need to register your collection system with the state. In Nevada, collection was illegal until 2017. The reasoning given is that water rights in the West were allocated before you were born, to municipalities and corporations, and those rights include the rain that has not fallen yet. Think about that for a second. They allocated the rights to rain that had not fallen. Your grandfather would have laughed himself off the porch. Number 19 is butchering your own livestock. There was a time in this country, and it was not that long ago, when every farm family killed their own hogs in November, hung the meat in the smokehouse, and that was their protein supply for the entire winter. This was called Hog Killing Day, and it was a community event. Neighbors came from miles around to help, to share the work and take home a portion. The knowledge of how to properly slaughter, bleed, and butcher a pig was considered basic adult competency, the kind of thing a teenage boy was expected to know before he could consider himself a man. Today, if you want to sell that meat to anyone, even your neighbor, even at a farmer's market, you need to use a USDA-inspected facility. The animal has to be transported, often stressed and killed by strangers in a factory. In many states, even killing your own animal for your own personal consumption can trigger local zoning ordinances if you live within certain municipal limits. Number 18 is saving your own seeds. I want you to understand how strange it is that I have to put this on a list like this one. For 10,000 years, agriculture was based entirely on the practice of selecting the best plants from your harvest, drying their seeds, and replanting them the following spring. This is how every crop variety that has ever existed was developed. This is how the specific tomato that thrives in your climate, in your soil, in your particular microclimate at the end of your specific road, came to exist. The knowledge of which seeds to save, how to dry them, how to store them, how to select for the traits you wanted. This was the most important agricultural knowledge a farmer could possess. Today, if you plant patented varieties, which now dominate the commercial seed supply, and save their seeds, you are violating federal intellectual property law. Monsanto, now Bayer, has sued hundreds of small farmers over this. Some of those farmers did not even plant those seeds intentionally. Wind carries pollen. That is not a metaphor. That is what happened to Percy Schmeiser in Canada, and it happened here too. Number 17 is building your own structures without a permit. Every barn, every outbuilding, every root cellar, every smokehouse that stands on old American farmsteads was built without a permit because there were no permits required. A man's property was his to develop as he saw fit. If he wanted to build a shed, he built a shed. If he wanted to add a room to his house, he picked up a hammer. The skills involved, basic carpentry, post and beam framing, foundation laying, were passed from father to son as a matter of course. Today, virtually any structure above a certain square footage requires permits, inspections, and compliance with building codes that are written by committees composed heavily of industry representatives. In some counties, you cannot build a structure of any kind, even a chicken coop, without pulling a permit. In extreme cases, people have been ordered to tear down structures that were built safely and have stood for decades simply because the paperwork was never filed. Number 16 is producing and selling raw milk. Before pasteurization became widespread in the early 20th century, every dairy animal in America produced raw milk, and every family that kept a cow or a goat drank it raw. The rich complexity of flavor in raw milk from a grass-fed animal is something most Americans alive today have never tasted. More importantly, the beneficial bacteria in raw milk, the lactobacillus strains and other organisms that thrive in fresh, clean milk from a healthy animal on clean pasture, are completely destroyed by the heat of pasteurization. Millions of people who cannot tolerate conventional milk report that they digest raw milk without any problem at all. Currently, raw milk sales are legal in some form in about 30 states. They are completely illegal in 13 states. The FDA actively discourages its consumption and has conducted raids on buying clubs and cooperatives where people were voluntarily pooling resources to access milk from a farmer they trusted. Number 15 is foraging for wild plants. For virtually all of human history, the knowledge of which wild plants were edible, medicinal, or useful was considered essential survival knowledge, the kind of thing every grandmother knew and every child learned before they were 10 years old. The ability to identify wild berries, edible roots, medicinal herbs, and edible greens in your local landscape was not a hobby. It was a fundamental life skill. Today, foraging is regulated or outright prohibited in most state and national parks. In some national forests, you need a permit to harvest even small quantities of plants for personal use. Certain species are protected regardless of their abundance. And while you can still forage on private property with permission, the cultural transmission of this knowledge has been so thoroughly disrupted that most Americans would starve in a food forest because they would not recognize a single edible species. Number 14 is well digging and water sourcing. For most of American history, a man who needed water on his land dug a well. He either dug it himself by hand, which required skill, patience, and knowledge of local geology, or he hired a neighbor who had that knowledge. Either way, the water beneath his land was understood to be his. The skill of reading landscape to find water, understanding soil layers, knowing how deep to dig, lining the well properly to prevent contamination. These were practical arts that kept communities alive across the entire continent before municipal water systems existed. In many states today, you need a licensed well driller to legally install a new well, at costs that can run to $10,000 or $20,000. In some places, connecting to municipal water is mandatory even if you have a functioning well on your property. Number 13 is hunting without licensing bureaucracy. If you are still watching, go ahead and leave a comment telling me which one of these has surprised you the most so far, because we are about halfway through and I want to know what is resonating. Our ancestors hunted for survival. There was no license, no season, no bag limit, no mandatory orange vest, no check-in station, no lottery for tags, no reporting requirement. You needed food, and the woods provided it. The relationship between a hunter and his landscape was intimate and ongoing, built over a lifetime of observation and accumulated knowledge about animal behavior, migration patterns, plant cycles, and weather. Regulated hunting is often justified as conservation, and there is genuine merit in some of those arguments. But the scale of bureaucracy that has grown up around what was once a simple act of feeding your family is worth reflecting on. In many states, hunting regulations run to hundreds of pages. Number 12 is herbal and folk medicine. Before the rise of modern pharmaceutical medicine and the licensing of medical practice, virtually every family had a medicine chest that was grown, not bought. Grandmothers knew which plants reduced fever, which ones drew out infection, which ones calmed a colicky baby, which ones eased the pain of arthritis. Midwives delivered babies and managed complications with herbal knowledge refined over generations. Root doctors, curanderas, and herbalists of every cultural tradition practiced their arts openly in communities that trusted them based on direct experience and reputation. Today, if you make or sell a preparation of a plant and make any claim that it can treat, cure, or prevent any disease or condition, you are in violation of FDA regulations. The same knowledge your great-grandmother used to keep her family healthy is now legally classified as practicing medicine without a license if you try to share it in certain ways. Number 11 is distilling spirits. Before Prohibition, and before the complex web of federal, state, and local alcohol regulations that replaced it, distillation was a normal farm skill in large parts of this country, particularly in Appalachian communities where corn was the primary crop, and distilling it into whiskey was simply the most practical way to preserve and transport the caloric value of grain over long distances. A bushel of corn is heavy and perishable. The whiskey made from it is compact, shelf-stable, and tradable. Today, producing spirits without a federal distilled spirits permit and all the accompanying state licenses is a federal crime, regardless of quantity and regardless of whether you sell it or not. The same craft your ancestors practiced on their own land, using their own grain and their own equipment, will get you a criminal record today. Number 10 is practicing midwifery and attending home births. For the overwhelming majority of human history, babies were born at home, attended by experienced women who had helped bring dozens or hundreds of children into the world. The knowledge of labor support, fetal positioning, natural pain management, and the management of common complications was held in the community, transmitted from experienced women to younger ones over years of apprenticeship. Today, the legality of midwifery and home birth varies dramatically by state. In some states, certified professional midwives can practice legally. In others, attending a home birth as a midwife without a nursing license is a criminal offense. Women who choose home birth in those states do so without legal attendance or with attendants who are technically operating outside the law. Number 9 is keeping livestock in residential areas. People kept chickens, rabbits, goats, and pigs in the yards of ordinary houses in ordinary American towns well into the 20th century. The victory gardens of World War II included small livestock. A family with a milk goat and a few laying hens was simply a careful and self-sufficient family, not a nuisance or a zoning violation. Today, most municipalities prohibit or severely restrict livestock of any kind in residential zones. Chickens have become a flashpoint, with cities drafting increasingly detailed ordinances about co-op placement, flock size, and whether or not roosters are permitted. Goats, which produce better milk per dollar of feed than any other animal, are prohibited in most suburban and urban zones entirely. Number 8 is building and using outhouses and composting toilets. Before municipal sewage systems, every rural property had an outhouse or a privy, and the management of human waste through burial, composting, or controlled decomposition was a practical skill that kept communities reasonably sanitary. The humanure approach, allowing properly managed human waste to compost completely and return to the soil as nutrients, has been practiced in Asia for thousands of years and produces safe, effective fertilizer. Today, in most jurisdictions, you are required to connect to a municipal sewer system or install a septic system that meets specific codes and is inspected by the county. An outhouse or composting toilet is often not a legal option, even in genuinely rural areas, even on large parcels of land with no neighbors within sight. Number 7 is bartering goods and services without reporting it. Before you scroll on, leave a comment telling me which one of these you think is the most important skill to learn right now, and I will read every single one. Trading your labor for your neighbor's eggs, or your extra firewood for help fixing your truck, is the oldest form of human economic exchange. It requires no infrastructure, no currency, no intermediary, and no record. Communities built on strong barter relationships are more resilient, more tightly bonded, and less dependent on systems that can fail. Technically, the IRS considers barter income to be taxable, and barter transactions of significant value are supposed to be reported. Most people do not report the fair market value of the eggs they traded their neighbor for splitting his woodpile, and most of the time, nothing happens. But the legal framework exists, and it has been enforced. Number 6 is making your own firearms. The tradition of the home gunsmith in America is as old as the country itself. The long rifles of the colonial period were made by individual craftsmen working in small shops or their own homes. Frontier families maintained and repaired their own weapons out of necessity because the nearest gunsmith might be 3 days' ride away. The knowledge of metallurgy, mechanics, and woodworking involved in building and repairing a firearm was considered a valuable and respectable trade. Under current federal law, an unlicensed individual can make a firearm for personal use in most states, with significant restrictions. But the legal landscape is shifting rapidly, and several states have moved to restrict or eliminate this right. The ATF's expanding regulatory authority over what constitutes a firearm and its components is a fast-moving area of law that is becoming more restrictive with each passing year. Number 5 is making and selling food without a commercial kitchen. Home cooks have always fed their communities. Church potlucks, neighborhood food exchanges, selling tamales from a cart or pies from a roadside stand. These were normal parts of community life, and they required no license, no certified kitchen, no food handler's permit, no health inspection. The grandmother who made the best tamales on the block could earn income from her skill without navigating a regulatory system built for commercial food manufacturers. Today, most states require any food sold to the public to be produced in a licensed and inspected commercial kitchen. Cottage food laws in many states create limited exceptions for certain non-perishable goods, but the scope is narrow and the restrictions are often onerous. The full stack of permits, insurance, and inspections required to legally sell food at any scale can easily cost more than a small food producer will earn in their first year. Number 4 is practicing veterinary care for your own animals. Farmers have always doctored their own livestock, treating wounds, pulling calves, giving basic medications, assessing and managing illness. These skills were essential and expected. A farmer who could not handle basic veterinary tasks was not much of a farmer, and the cost of calling a professional veterinarian for every minor ailment would have bankrupted most small operations within a season. Today, the practice of veterinary medicine is strictly licensed in every state. Many medications that were freely available over the counter a generation ago now require a veterinarian's prescription under the Veterinary Feed Directive and other regulatory frameworks. The practical knowledge of animal husbandry and basic veterinary care that grandparents took for granted is increasingly difficult to practice legally, even on your own animals, on your own land. Number 3 is operating a small school or teaching your children at home without oversight. There was no mandatory attendance law anywhere in the United States until the 1850s. One-room schoolhouses were community projects, run by whoever in the community had enough education to teach, funded locally and governed locally. Parents who kept their children home to work the farm during harvest or planting seasons were not in violation of anything, because the decision about a child's education was understood to rest with the family. Homeschooling is legal in all 50 states today, but the regulatory environment varies enormously. Some states require notification, curriculum approval, testing, and periodic review by authorities. The idea that the state has a primary claim on the education of your child, and that the family's role is secondary, would have been completely foreign to most Americans for the first century and a half of this country's existence. Number 2 is living off-grid without utility connections. People lived entirely off-grid for the entirety of human history until approximately the 1930s, when rural electrification began in earnest. The skills of living well without grid electricity, without municipal water, without natural gas lines, without cable, without broadband, are not primitive. They are sophisticated, and they represent a profound form of independence. Solar panels, wind turbines, rainwater catchment, root cellars, wood heat, hand tools, and preserved food stores are the architecture of a genuinely self-sufficient life. But in growing numbers of jurisdictions, you cannot legally occupy a dwelling that is not connected to utilities. You cannot get a certificate of occupancy for a home that does not meet minimum code requirements for electrical systems, plumbing, and heating. The legal right to simply live on your land in a dwelling you built with your own hands, without being connected to a single corporate or municipal service, is increasingly not a right at all. And the number one skill on this list, the one that used to be the most universal and ordinary thing a person could do, and is now the most profoundly regulated, is growing your own food and feeding your own family from your own land. I saved this for last not because it is the most dramatic, but because it is the most fundamental. Before supermarkets, before food stamps, before the entire infrastructure of industrial agriculture, every family that did not grow its own food went hungry. The skill of feeding yourself and your household from a plot of land was not a hobby, not a lifestyle choice, not a political statement. It was what adults did. It was the primary occupation of the majority of human beings who have ever lived on this planet. Today, growing food in your own yard is restricted or prohibited by homeowner association rules in millions of American neighborhoods. Front yard gardens have been ordered removed by municipalities citing aesthetic codes. Residents have been fined for growing vegetables where grass is expected. Small-scale animal husbandry, as we have discussed, is prohibited in most residential zones. Even the small act of planting fruit trees can violate setback regulations. And on the regulatory side, if you try to sell any significant quantity of what you grow, you enter a thicket of rules about organic certification, pesticide use, Food Safety Modernization Act requirements, and labeling laws that were written for industrial producers and scaled down badly to apply to the person selling zucchini from their driveway. The knowledge of how to grow a year's worth of food for a family, how to preserve it, store it, and manage it through the winter, is knowledge that most Americans alive today do not possess. That is not an accident. That is the outcome of a set of policies and economic arrangements that replaced self-sufficiency with dependency at every opportunity, and did it so gradually that most of us did not notice until we looked up and realized we could not feed ourselves if the supply chain paused for 2 weeks. Your great-grandmother could have fed her family for a year from her backyard. Think about whether you could do the same. Think about what it would take to get there. And think about who benefits from you not being able to. So, here is my question for you, and I want you to answer it in the comments because I read all of them. Which one of these skills are you actively working to recover? Which one did you already know your grandparents practiced that you have let go? And which one surprised you the most when you realized it was now regulated or restricted? Leave your answer below. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. And if you have not subscribed, hit that button right now. We are not done talking about this. Next week, we are going to go deeper on several of these and talk about what it actually looks like to build back this knowledge in a modern context, legally and practically. Stay self-reliant out there.